The road leading into Windhill wound like a dusty ribbon, cutting through dry cornfields and yellow grassy hills. It was November, and the wind blew in from the plains, carrying the cold, dry scent of late autumn. An old bus screeched to a halt beside a peeling wooden sign.
Welcome to Windhill, where the wind never sleeps. A man stepped off.
He was in his 40s, tall and thin, wearing a faded gray overcoat. In his hands, he carried only a worn brown leather suitcase, its corners eaten away by termites. The scratches of time were visible beneath the thick layer of dust. It was Caleb Turner, the son who had left the village 20 years before, and never returned. The familiar road was now deserted. The old Johnson's grocery building was closed. The white paint on the church roof was peeling off in large patches. The children who used to play on the slope were nowhere to be seen, only a few old people quietly sweeping leaves in front of the yard. Caleb walked slowly past each house, as if afraid that the past would recognize him. His footsteps stopped in front of a wooden house located separately at the end of the road, the house of his father, Mr. Jacob Turner. The wooden door creaked slightly when he pushed it open. The air was cold, heavy with the smell of mold and rotten wood.
11 tables, en hall photo les faces down.
He picked it up. It was a photo of his father, still wearing the old brown coat, his eyes gentle but serious. Next to the photo frame was a yellowed letter, sealed with red wax, with a scribbled handwriting.
To my son, Caleb, open only when you are ready.
Caleb was silent. He remembered the day he left the village, swearing never to return to this place. He was just a 19-year-old boy, carrying with him the regret of an accident that left his best friend, Ben Harper, drowned in Windhill Lake. That death had turned the whole village against him, and even his strict father, Jacob, had not said goodbye to him.
20 years. 20 years of running away, working for hire everywhere, living like a shadow.
And now he had returned, with nothing but an old suitcase and an unopened letter. Night had fallen. The house was silent except for the ticking of the old clock. Caleb sat on a wooden chair, a cold cup of coffee in his hand, his eyes on the letter. He reached out to open it, then put it down. Not yet, he said to himself.
Outside, the wind blew through the birch.
Each leaf fell onto the roof, falling as if whispering, "Welcome home." The next morning, Caleb went to the village market. Windhill still had a small market in the old square, where people sold produce, jams, and bottles of handmade honey. Despite being poor, the people here still maintained a rustic warmth. As Caleb walked by, a few people recognized him. They whispered, some turned away, some just stared without saying anything. An old woman selling bread smiled cautiously.
Monsieur Turner, right?
It's been a long time. Caleb nodded, a forced smile. Yes, I've been back to clean up the old house for a while.
The old woman sighed softly.
Your father always believed you would come back. He still sits on the porch, looking out this way every afternoon. The words made Caleb's chest tighten. He nodded in thanks, then bought a loaf of bread, and headed towards the western hill, where the lake was, where the memories began. Windhill Lake was as calm as ever, its surface reflecting the clear sky. But for Caleb, this place was a wound that would never heal. He knelt down on the grassy bank, his hand touching the cold water. Ben, if you were alive, what would you say to me? The wind blew, carrying the rustling of leaves, like a wordless answer. On the way back, Caleb came across a little girl sitting by the roadside, selling small bunches of bright yellow sunflowers in a field of withered flowers. She was about 8 or 9 years old, with bright eyes and sweat-streaked blonde hair. On a small wooden sign was scrawled,
Un bunch, 25 cents. Flowers bring good luck tournesol.
Caleb stopped, looked at the girl.
What is your name?
I'm Lily, sir, she replied, her voice clear. Would you like to buy some? They make people smile again. Caleb laughed, for the first time in years. He took out a few coins and bought the whole basket of flowers. Do you think you can smile again? If you believe it, sir. The answer made him pause. The little girl was small and ragged, but her eyes were brighter than the flowers in her hands. When Caleb returned home, the wind carried the scent of sunflowers throughout the old room. He placed them on the table, right next to the unopened letter. For the first time in many years, he felt his heart soften. That night, before going to bed, he wrote in his father's old notebook.
First day back. The wind still blow.
The village is still sad. But something, is changing.
Outside, the wind rustled through the hills.
In the old wooden house, amid the musty smell and sunflowers, a small miracle was brewing, quietly but truly. The morning in Millstone began as usual. Mist hung over the meadows, the distant crowing of roosters, and the smell of baked goods from May's diner wafting through the small square. But this morning, something strange happened. An old pale yellow truck stopped by the main road, right under the ancient oak tree. On the truck bed, dozens of pots of bright tulips were neatly arranged, red, yellow, white, purple, like a piece of spring sky falling over the autumn countryside. The owner of the truck was Mr. John Marner, a man in his 60s, thin, with a white beard, deep but gentle eyes. He was not from the village. People said he had been an engineer in the city, but after a great event, he left everything behind, lived in seclusion, and wandered around selling flowers. As soon as the truck stopped, the children rushed out to see.
Sir, why do you grow tulip and not rose?
Asked Daisy, her eyes curious.
Monsieur.
John laughed, his voice hoarse but warm.
Because tulip bloom even in the cold, my dear.
Beauty lies not only in their splendor, but in their courage to endure the winter. From the opposite cafe, Clara Bennett, a widow who lived alone after her husband died in the war, looked over. She was not interested in strangers, but somehow Mr. John's hands, calloused but tenderly holding each petal, made her stare longer than usual. It was a light rain at noon.
Monsieur.
John covered the flower pots with an old tarpaulin. Clara crossed the street, carrying a cup of hot coffee. You'll catch a cold if you stay out here, she said in a small voice. He took the cup of coffee, his smile slightly sad.
Amused to it.
Rain is like sadness, if you don't run away, it will pass. That made Clara silent. She never expected a stranger to say the same thing she had been thinking for years. That night, the villagers gathered in the small pub. The story of the old tulip seller spread quickly. Some said he was crazy, others said he had been rich. But the strangest thing, every person who bought flowers from him, the next morning found something changed. The Parkers, the poor farmers, bought a pot of yellow flowers for their wife. The next morning, after months of drought, their garden suddenly had a small rain that fell only in that area. Mrs. May at the bakery placed flowers on the counter. The next day, customers came in more than ever. And little Daisy placed a pot of purple tulips on her desk. The scholarship letter she thought would never come was right in front of her door. People began to call Mr.
John the Miracle Man.
But he just smiled. I don't create miracles. I just give people a chance to believe that they can exist. One afternoon, as dusk fell over the cornfield, Clara came over to him again. She asked, "Do you really believe that these flowers have magic?" He looked far away.
No.
I just believe that. Everyone has a magic in their heart. Flowers just help them remember it. At night, Clara brought home a pot of red tulips. She placed it on the table, right next to the framed photo of her late husband. The next morning, she woke up and saw something strange. The petals were still closed, but the dew on the petals clearly reflected an image, the silhouette of a smiling soldier. She sat silently, tears falling. Maybe it was just an illusion, but in her heart, for the first time in many years, she felt warm and forgiven. Outside, Mr. John's yellow truck had left Millstone, leaving only a few tire marks fading in the morning mist, and the whole village was still bright with the color of tulips that had not yet faded. Last night's rain had washed away the layers of dust that covered the old roof tiles of Millstone. This morning, as the first rays of sunlight touched the oak trees, a postboy named Evan Miller discovered something strange, a letter with no address, only a handwritten note.
To the one still waiting.
Evan didn't know what to do, so he took the letter to Mrs. May's shop, where the whole village usually gathered in the morning. She carefully opened it. Inside was an old yellow paper, the ink smeared by the rain, but the words were still legible. I apologize for leaving without saying goodbye. If you can, I hope you will forgive me, and continue to believe that miracles still exist in this world. No one knew who had written it, but the handwriting was familiar, soft, slanted slightly to the right, exactly like that of Mr. John Marner, the tulip seller who had left 3 days earlier. The rumor spread quickly. People began to talk. Maybe he wrote it to his ex-lover, or to himself, or to the whole village. But one person said nothing, Clara Bennett. She quietly took the letter home, pressing it between the old Bible. That evening, she went out to the porch. The red tulip pot was still blooming, though the season had passed. The petals trembled in the wind as if whispering. "Forgive," she whispered, repeating those two words. 4 years, since her husband died, she had never forgiven life, nor had she forgiven herself for not stopping him from leaving. The next morning, Evan ran to her house.
Miss Clara, do you believe, monsieur? John will come back.
She smiled sadly. No one really leaves, Evan. They just choose to stay in other ways. The boy looked around, then pointed to the edge of the forest.
Miss, there's something strange.
Tulips are growing all over the stream, while no one has ever planted them there before. Clara and the boy went out to see. Along the small stream, dozens, hundreds of tulips were blooming, spreading their petals in the golden sunlight. But what made her stop was the yellow truck lying still under the maple tree, covered with a layer of dry leaves. No one in the village knew when it had arrived. Inside the truck was only a small wooden board, engraved with the words, "The miracle is not in the flowers, but in the hearts of those who know how to love." She reached out and lightly touched the engraving. The wood was still new, as if it had been carved yesterday. But at that moment, a gentle breeze blew by, carrying the sweet scent of tulips and the sound of church bells echoing from afar. At night, the villagers gathered by the stream, where the rows of flowers were glowing like fire. Mrs. May said, her voice trembling, "I don't think he ever really left. He just left his magic here." Evan placed the letter on a stone slab in the middle of the stream. The stream carried the paper, reflecting the moonlight. It looked like a shimmering silver strip floating away. Clara watched, her heart filled with emotion.
She said softly, "I've talking to the wind."
"Thank you, John. Maybe. I'm starting to believe in miracles." That night, all over Millstone, the tulips began to bloom, even though no one had watered them. Every house, every person felt a slight warmth in their hearts, as if someone had just touched them with an invisible hand. No one knew if miracles were real. But from that day on, people lived more gently, more kindly, and more trusting, as if in each flower, there was a part of the old man's soul smiling. That March, the skies over Millstone were not as clear as usual. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, weighing down on the old wooden roofs. The villagers said they had never seen such a strong wind blowing through every door, shaking the glass, like the sigh of someone who had died. Clara stood in the house, looking through the steamed-up window.
The tulip on the porch trembled in the wind.
She knew, one more gust and they would break. She wanted to run to cover them with a cloth, but her hand stopped in mid-air. In her head echoed John's words from the letter. "The magic is not in the flowers, but in the hearts of those who love." She smiled slightly. Well, if it is a magic, let them fight it.
The wind grew stronger.
Evan was running along the stream, trying to tie up the planks that the village men had put up to prevent flooding. He was just a boy, his hands and feet dirty, his raincoat torn by the wind, but there was a strange determination in his eyes. He believed, like Clara, that the magic of this village had not yet faded. "Evan, go home," Mrs. May shouted from afar. But he only turned back and smiled. "I have to tie this place more. The water is about to overflow, Grandma." A plank broke off, and water rushed up like a wild animal. Evan fell headlong into the cold stream. In that brief moment, he saw red tulips floating on the water. They glowed softly like small lamps in the rainy night. He swam instinctively, his weak hands trying to cling to the roots of the tree. And then, a hand grabbed his wrist. It was Clara. She pulled him up, and they both fell into the mud. Their breathing was labored, and the rain poured down like whips. Evan looked at her, his voice trembling.
You see?
The tulips are shining." Clara looked up. Along the stream, hundreds of small flowers emitted a dim light, like small flames in the night. The wind was still howling, the rain was still falling, but the light did not go out. She was silent, her eyes wide open. The miracle was really happening. That night, the storm continued. The roofs of several households were blown off, the cowsheds collapsed, and the village roads were flooded. But no one was hurt. The tulips along the stream, strangely, still stood upright, not broken, not wilted, even though the wind was strong enough to knock down rows of maple trees. The next morning, the sky was clear. The stream overflowed its banks, the water covered the ground with silt, but there, the rows of red flowers were still blooming brightly. People said they heard a faint ringing of bells in the night, though no one rang the church bell. Clara, in her hand, held the old silver bracelet that Mr. John had worn. It was stuck on a tulip branch near the stream. That day, the people of Millstone gathered together, repaired their houses, cleared the streets, and rebuilt their fences. No one gave orders, no one told them, but everyone volunteered, because they understood that miracles are not some distant mystery, but when people know how to hold hands in times of trouble. Clara cooked a large pot of soup and placed it in the middle of the square, and everyone who passed by was offered a hot bowl. Mrs. May brought it out to her bakery, and Evan helped hand out blankets. The village seemed to have been swept by a storm, but strangely enough, it was brighter than ever. When night fell, when everything was peaceful again, Clara wrote another letter. There was no sender, and no recipient. She simply wrote, "Thank you for showing us that miracles are all around us. In people's hearts, in the hands that give, in the smiles that follow tears." She folded the letter, put it in a glass jar, and dropped it into the stream.
The jar floated away, reflecting the full moon shining through the thin clouds.
The next morning, Evan ran to her house, smiling brightly.
Clara.
The children in the village said they saw someone standing on the other side of the stream last night. They said he was wearing a yellow coat. Clara smiled, but did not answer. She looked up at the clear blue sky after the storm, where sunlight filtered through the trees. "Maybe he's still here, Evan."
The boy smiled.
"Then, he'll be happy, won't he?" "Yes," she replied, gently stroking his head. "Because miracles, Evan, have finally blossomed in our hearts." One spring morning, when the dew was still on the grass, the village of Millstone awoke to the familiar sounds of peaceful life. The crowing of a rooster from Mrs. May's farm, the clattering of the old blacksmith's hammer, and the shrill laughter of children chasing each other around the stream bank, which had been the epicenter of the storm last year. But this morning was different. On the stream bank, the rows of red tulips were still blooming, but there was something more unusual. People noticed that among the flowers grew a single pure white tulip, shining like moonlight in the mist. The whole village came out to see. Evan ran to call Miss Clara. She came, still holding the old Bible in her hand, where she had pressed Mr. John's letter that year. When she saw the white flower, she stopped, her lips moving but she could not speak.
"John, are you trying to tell us again?"
Evan was bewildered. "What did you say?" Clara bent down and gently touched the petals with her fingertips. A gentle breeze blew, carrying a sweet scent. She could hear it in her heart, as if someone were smiling. That evening, the villagers held a memorial service for John by the stream. No one knew exactly when he left, but they chose the March wind, the day the village weathered the terrible storm and recognized the miracle of human hearts. People brought tulips, cakes, and small candles to place along the stream. Evan stood on a rock and read aloud the first letter from John he had ever found. "I'm sorry I left without saying goodbye. If you can, I hope you can forgive me, and continue to believe that miracles still exist in this world." The boy's voice trembled, but the village was silent. Someone was crying. Someone was holding the hand of the person next to him.
The candlelight reflected on the water, shimmering like thousands of stars shining down.
Then something strange happened. From the middle of the stream, a gentle white light began to spread, as light as a breath. No one could believe their eyes. The light was coming from a single white tulip. The petals slowly opened, and in the center of the flower was a small glass bottle, containing a carefully folded piece of paper. Clara walked tremblingly forward and opened the lid. The paper was wet, but the handwriting was still clear.
"If one day, Millstone smiles again.
Then I know I am still alive in everyone's hearts. My last miracle is not flowers, nor light, but love, something that never dies." The whole village fell silent. Evan raised his head, his eyes sparkling in the candlelight. "Miss Clara, he really never left, right?" She smiled, her eyes moist.
"No, Evan.
He is still here in each of us in the things we do every day." After the ceremony, the people of Millstone decided to build a small wooden bridge across the stream, called the Bridge of Light. On the wooden board at the head of the bridge, they carved the words,
"Here miracles bloomed, and still bloom every day."
Every year on that day, the whole village gathered, released small lanterns into the water, to remember the man who taught them to believe in miracles. The children grew up with stories about John the Tulip Man, and although they had never met him, they all believed that he still walked around the village every morning, in the form of an old man smiling under the maple tree. Many years later, when Evan had grown up and left the village to study far away, every time he returned, he stopped by that bridge. He sat down, dropped a tulip petal into the water, and said softly,
Isti believ, sir. Miracle still exist in this life.
The stream still flows, the sunlight still shimmers through the dewdrops, and from afar, the church bells ring, deep familiar, like the heartbeat of that small village. Millstone is still a peaceful village like any other, but anyone who has visited can feel something special. Maybe it's the scent of tulips wafting in the wind. Maybe it's the gentle smiles of the people here. Or maybe, it's because the miracle has never truly left.
Because the miracle of life
is when people know how to love each other, even when everything seems lost. The story ends here. Remember to follow and turn on the bell to follow my meaningful stories.